What are we discussing on today's Locked On Diamondbacks podcast? Tommy Henry shines again. Did the Dbacks have the best offseason in the major leagues? And who can steal a wildcard spot from the Dbacks this upcoming season?
You are Locked On Diamondbacks, your daily Arizona Diamondbacks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. You're listening to who? Always charismatic host of this podcast, Millard Thomas. I'm a multimedia journalist and I'm a graphic designer, so please go check out my website, millardthomas24.myportfolio.com. On there you can see all my latest work, from my packages to my articles to my photos and my graphic design. If you want to see more content by me, just follow me on Twitter at CareerThomas24 for my personal account, or look up Locked On Diamondbacks, both Twitter, Instagram for the podcast handle. And thank you for making Locked On Diamondbacks your first listen every day. I would not be able to do this podcast without you, my loyal listeners, sharing, subscribing, reviewing, doing all that so I could do this podcast for you. Thank you. It's free and available on all platforms, so please continue to tell your friends. And one of those platforms is YouTube, so please hit subscribe to Locked On Diamondbacks on YouTube. We are officially 1 month away from opening day. I'm trying to hit 1,000 subscribers before opening day, a month away. So please hit subscribe to Locked On Diamondbacks on YouTube. And what are we talking about on today's podcast? Which teams are most likely to steal a wildcard spot from the Dbacks this upcoming season? So we'll talk about the most dangerous teams that could keep the Dbacks out the postseason for this upcoming year. Did the Dbacks have the best offseason among all major league teams? And we'll talk about Tommy Henry shining once again. But before we get into that conversation, I want to tell you that today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. But now let's get into the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast and talk a little bit about spring training, because we got to see Tommy Henry once again razzle and dazzle in spring training, but we also got to see the spring training debut of another Dbacks pitcher, someone who's going to be starting potentially, depending on if he improves from what he did in the regular season last year. Brandon Pfaadt made his spring training debut. He is guaranteed the number 4 spot in the rotation right now, but if he continues to pitch like that with the way Tommy Henry's pitching, maybe we have a changing of the guard. I don't think the D-backs are ready to go in that direction yet. But really, the way Tommy Henry has looked this spring training and the way he looked last year, maybe Tommy Henry is making a case and a run for that number 4 spot in the rotation. And maybe we get to the playoffs and we're like, you know what? Tommy Henry definitely deserves that number 4 spot. And there is worse problems to have than how am I going to figure out how to build my playoff rotation, because I have too many good quality pitchers that could throw in that mix. So good problem to have for the D-backs. But let's first start off with Brandon Pfaadt, because he started this game against the Cleveland Guardians and he did not look like playoff Pfaadt. And maybe he needs it to be the playoffs to see the best version of himself, because Pfaadt was really bad last year in the regular season. He had an ERA north of 5. He was a home run happy pitcher. Like, Pfaadt, from the numbers, statistically did not have himself a pretty rookie season. I think most of us were disappointed with how he looked in the regular season, but I think we're okay with his rookie campaign, because all that matters is the last few starts he had against the postseason. The last few starts he had in the postseason, where he gave up like 5 earned runs over 19 innings pitched, in the playoffs against the Dodgers, Phillies, and Rangers. So he came through when it mattered most, and we want him to hopefully carry that momentum that he had in last year's postseason into this year's regular season, because if he can do that, he will arguably be the best number 4 pitcher in baseball. There are definitely guys that you could put ahead of Pfaadt, but Pfaadt could be in the mix for one of the best number 4 pitchers in baseball. And Wednesday, I was trying to think of what day we saw Brandon Pfaadt. Wednesday, we got to see the first start for Brandon Pfaadt this spring training. And unfortunately, Brandon Pfaadt looked more like regular season Pfaadt than postseason Pfaadt because he went out there, the stuff, the command didn't look the best, didn't look like how it looked like when he pitched against the Dodgers and the Phillies and the Rangers, right? He allowed a walk, a single, gave up a double, gave up 2 runs in the first. Like, it just wasn't a pretty start for Pfaadt. His fastball sat between 92 to 94 miles an hour. Like, just not the prettiest start. The stuff wasn't great. He was not hitting his locations. Like, it's not something that I'm going to be showing my kids later on. I wouldn't be showing the tape of Brandon Pfaadt's spring training debut to people if I want to tell them that this guy is going to be a breakout star for the D-backs this season. But it's okay because no one was concerned with how Brandon Pfaadt looked today. Neither Pfaadt nor Lovullo were concerned. Pfaadt was like, I'm happy just to be out there, get my feet wet. I've been progressing slowly through the offseason. He's been ramping up slowly. So he was just happy to go out there and, throw some pitches. Torey Lovullo, kind of the same thing. He knew Brandon Pfaadt didn't have his best stuff today, but he wasn't at all worried. So if Lovullo and Pfaadt aren't worried, I'm not worried either. As we get closer to the regular season, if Pfaadt continues to struggle, then maybe we'll change our mindset toward Pfaadt just a little bit. But right after Pfaadt left in that second inning, Tommy Henry came in and immediately started looking good, retired the side in order on 8 pitches in the second inning. Also retired the side in order again in the third inning. He only needed 29 pitches total to record his 9 outs. Like, Tommy Henry is maybe the player to watch out for from this D-backs team this season in terms of an under the radar, diamond in the rough kind of gem. If you need your Geraldo Perdomo player for this season, the guy who you might not have really thought too highly of before, or the guy you just don't have major expectations for this upcoming season, that would be my Geraldo Perdomo player, because entering last season, I didn't really think much of Geraldo Perdomo. I was like, yeah, he'll probably be the starting shortstop again, but I wasn't a huge fan of his game. Offensively, I was like, he's just another Nick Ahmed. Defensively, he's fine. He can base run a little bit. But what he did this past season, breakout year in terms of runners and scoring position, great plate discipline, great base runner. Like, he really improved his game. And maybe Tommy Henry could be this year's Geraldo Perdomo, where he sneaks under the radar and then actually ends up being a really important piece for the D-backs. Again, Perdomo, all-star season last year. So if Tommy Henry comes anywhere close to an all-star season as the D-backs number 5 starter, I think we're cooking with gas. Lovullo also thought Tommy Henry was exceptional out there, commanding his pitches, mixing his pitches. So really, really good stuff by Tommy Henry in his second outing this spring training. And then the offense also came through. I mean, it was a comeback by the D-backs, 4-run 9th inning by all their guys who won't be making the roster, but still fun to see. And of the guys who will be making the roster, I mean, we think Tucker Barnhart might make it. He's in the battle for backup shortstop. His stock is up. He ripped one down the line for some ribbies. He looked good today offensively. Lourdes Gurriel, big fly ball home run in this game. We talked on yesterday's podcast about how maybe Lourdes Gurriel should be the number 3 hitter for the D-backs, because when you look at the numbers, Lourdes Gurriel put up some monster stats when he batted third last season. And then in this game, immediately goes yard. It's like he was listening to the Locked on Diamondbacks podcast. And then finally, when looking at the battle of backup shortstop, which is currently maybe the best battle that the D-backs have going on this spring training, either that or the battle for the number 5 starter, because those 2 battles have been really good so far. The Nelsons, the Slades, the Tommy Henrys have all been good for that rotation spot. And then Lawler and Blaze Alexander have been really good for the battle of backup shortstop. We didn't see Blaze on Wednesday, but Lawler got on base 3 times, a hit with 2 walks drawn. He did have a base running blunder where he had his head down and got thrown out, but he made it up later on a great defensive diving stop to throw out De Los Santos, who was a former D-backs prospect. So good job by Jordan Lawler. The offensive pieces looked really good in Wednesday's game. Most of the pitchers looked good as well. Pfaadt struggled, but at least Tommy Henry shined once again, and he is solidifying his spot to be the D-backs number 5 starter in 2024. Now we'll talk about if the D-backs had the best offseason in Major League Baseball in segment number 2. But I first want to talk to you guys about Game Time, because if you're thinking about buying tickets to see the D-backs in 2024, then the best place to do that is Game Time. Game Time is the only ticketing app that gives you complete peace of mind with your purchase. See the view from your seat before you buy, so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. All-in prices show your total up front, so you know you're getting a great deal before you check out. Buy tickets in seconds with 2 taps. Game Time has deals on tickets right up to the start of the event. Find exclusive flash deals and sponsor deals on tickets for football, basketball, baseball, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. With zone deals, you pick the section and Game Time picks the seats for big time savings. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. All right. Let's get back into the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast. Let's discuss if the D-backs had the best offseason in Major League Baseball. Not just the NL West conversation, not just the National League conversation, but the entire sport, because I do think the D-backs have an argument for the best offseason. I will start off. The Dodgers brought in the most talent this offseason. So if you want to say the Dodgers had the best offseason, fine. They got Yamamoto, Glasnow, Ohtani. I won't argue with you. Teoscar Hernandez. I just want to take the Dodgers out this discussion. I'm going to do it right now. We're going to take the Dodgers out and say, of the non-Dodgers teams, because I don't want to talk about a team with the pocketbooks that they have, always starting with a head start in the offseason. I'm not even counting the Dodgers. Of the non-Dodgers teams, did the D-backs have the best MLB offseason? Well, the D-backs did spend the 4th most money this offseason, so it's not like they were being cheap at all this offseason. And while spending the 4th most money, the D-backs were able to fill out their roster. They added an all-star level pitcher in Eduardo Rodriguez, 2 quality bats to be the DH in Jock Peterson and Randall Grichuk. You traded for a power-hitting third baseman in Eugenio Suarez, and you re-signed your left fielder, Lourdes Gurriel. You got yourself now a complete roster if you're the D-backs. So entering the offseason, the D-backs had holes for the rotation, third base, DH, and outfield. They plugged up all their holes. They're already coming off the World Series last year. Enter this offseason, how can we improve and get better? They hit everything on their checklist. So for at least Mike Hazen in their front office, they get an A for how they handled this offseason. But just because the D-backs get an A on their report card, does that mean it was the best report card in the class? Does that mean they did the best, among all the teams in terms of acquiring talent this offseason? Well, let's take a deep dive and look at it. Obviously, the Dodgers spent the most. They acquired the most talent. Again, we're going to keep the Dodgers out of it. Who spent the second most money this offseason? It was the Houston Astros. And to be honest, most of it just went to re-signing their own players. Their big acquisition this year was Josh Hader, which was an elite acquisition, right? He's arguably the best closer in baseball. But whenever you historically look at closers getting fat contracts, especially, Hader got a massive number. Those deals don't typically work out. I'm sure Hader's going to be fine for the Astros, but if your biggest acquisition is a closer, I'm not going to say you had a better offseason than the D-backs. Number 3, the Philadelphia Phillies. They spent the 3rd most money, but guess what? Most of that just went to bringing back Aaron Nola, which is a good thing. Aaron Nola is a stud pitcher. But your big acquisition outside of re-signing your own was bringing in Whit Merrifield, who was just like a speedster defensive utility player. I'm going to say the D-backs had a better offseason when they actually added new players to their team to help them out. The Phillies already had a really good team, so it's not like they had to go out there and spend $300 million this offseason. Their team is already kind of complete, so it makes sense that the D-backs had a better offseason than Philadelphia. So when I look at the teams that spend more money than the D-backs this year, outside of the Dodgers, of course, the Astros and Phillies, most of their money just went to bringing back their own players. And because of that, the D-backs definitely had better off seasons than those two. But how about the rest of the list? If you go down the entire top 10, is there anyone who has a better offseason than the D-backs? The Cardinals were 5th. They brought in Sonny Gray, Cal Gibson, Lance Lynn. I wouldn't say so. Sonny Gray's coming off a monster Cy Young season, but that rotation is old. Wainwright, Gibson, Lance Lynn, Miles Mikolas is in his mid-30s, Sonny Gray mid-30s. Like, get out of here with the Cardinals. Cincinnati Reds, 6th most money spent. Big dark horse team this year, but I don't know if I would say they had a better offseason than the D-backs. I do like their offseason. Candelario's a nice pickup. Montes, Nick Martinez, Emilio Pagan. But those players aren't better than who the D-backs brought in. Like Jock, Grichuk, Suarez, Gurriel, Erod. Like, you would take most of those players over the Reds acquisitions. Maybe Candelario fits in somewhere, but D-backs definitely added more talent than the Reds this offseason. The Royals spent the 7th most money. I actually really like the Royals offseason. I think they're a sneaky team in terms of when you're looking at the over-unders to take the over on FanDuel. Seth Lugo, Waka, Will Smith, Stratton, Nick Anderson, Hunter Renfroe, Garrett Hampson. Like, I think they got better in terms of just adding more quality Major League talent on that roster. I don't think the Royals are winning 90 games or anything this year. If you tell me the Royals go 80-82 and hit their over, I would not be shocked at all, but they definitely didn't have a better offseason than the D-backs. Outside the Dodgers, this is really the first team that makes me think if they had a better offseason than the D-backs. This team spent the 8th most money among teams this offseason. I'm talking about the New York Yankees. They brought in Juan Soto, who is better than any player the D-backs brought in this season. They also brought in Verdugo, Stroman, Grisham. Like, they had a really good offseason if you're the Yankees. But when comparing it to the D-backs offseason, the only thing I would push back on is the Yankees had to trade for Juan Soto, and they did give up a pretty nice package for him. I do like some of the starting pitchers and relievers that they gave up for Juan Soto. So, yes, Juan Soto was the best player acquired between the D-backs and Yankees this offseason, but you did have to give up a decent amount to acquire Juan Soto. And then after that, I could say all the D-backs acquisitions are better than a Verdugo or Marcus Stroman. I think it's close. If you want to tell me the Yankees had a better offseason, I'm not going to argue with you, but I think I would take the D-backs offseason over the Yankees, despite Juan Soto being the best player that either of those two teams acquired. 9th on this list is the San Francisco Giants, who did bring in some interesting pieces, I will add. Jung-Ho Lee, we don't know what he is going to look like on the major league level, but was a quality player overseas. Jorge Soler's coming off a monster season. I thought that was a pretty nice pickup by the Giants. Jordan Hicks might be a starter this year. He's been a quality reliever throughout his career. We'll see how that transition goes. Robbie Ray, traded for, won't be there to start the season, but still a nice acquisition and will start, probably midway, halfway point of the season. So I do like the pieces that the Giants brought in, but they did have a decent amount of talent also walk out the door this year. And I just don't know what a Jung-Ho Lee is going to do for me. He's just a question mark. He can be an all-star. I just don't know yet. Robbie Ray, he's not going to be playing for half this season, right? So from the knowns, I just think there's less unknowns with the D-backs. I think there's more question marks surrounding the San Francisco Giants and the players that they acquired this offseason. So because of that, I think the D-backs definitely had a better offseason than the Giants. And then finally, the team that spent the 10th most money this offseason, the Milwaukee Brewers. They brought in Rhys Hoskins, Gary Sanchez, Jacob Junis, guys like that. They ended up bringing in good players. The issue is they traded away Corbin Burnes, who is the best player in that franchise, right? Corbin Burnes was their best player, and he's now a Baltimore Oriole. So if you're a team that trades away your best player, it's hard to say that you improved this offseason. So of all the teams that I just went through in the top 10 of spending outside the LA Dodgers, I think the D-backs did have the best offseason. I think they added the most amount of talent for the best bang for their buck. Like, You're paying your outfield on average $9 million. Suarez is middle of the pack in terms of his salary when he was acquired. Gurriel, $14 a year. Erod, yes, he's getting 20. Frankie Montes is getting like 16, 17. So it's like D-backs got good value for all their free agents, and they're all quality free agents. And even if you grade the D-backs on a curve, if we started adding the curve in a little context and said, you know what, the Dodgers start every offseason with a head start. Their purses are bigger than the D-backs. Free agents already have a bigger eye on the Dodgers than the D-backs because of the market they play in. There's so many factors that give the Dodgers a leg up. And because of that, if I grade this on a curve, I could say the D-backs had the best offseason in Major League Baseball, but that would sound a little bit too biased. So I'll say D-backs had the best offseason of all non-Dodgers teams in 2024. Now we'll talk about who can steal a wild card spot from the D-backs this upcoming season. But before we get into that conversation, I first want to talk to you guys about FanDuel, because if you think the D-backs are guaranteed to make the postseason in 2024, then why not go bet on it on FanDuel Sportsbooks? Because get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. Bet on all your favorite NBA players and teams with quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, and more. Now that baseball season is back in full swing, I'm going to be doing some baseball same-game parlays. Give me the D-backs money line, over on Corbin Carroll total bases, and give me that Ketel Marte RBI. That pays out at plus 300 or more. I'm a lock to put $10 down. And if you want to put 10 down, just visit fanduel.com/lockedon and shoot your shot. FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NBA. All right, let's get back into the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast. Let's talk about who could be the biggest threats to jump the D-backs in the standings and potentially steal a wild card spot. So I want to talk about who are the teams I think are the most dangerous to steal the 3 wild card spots from the D-backs, because to be honest, Dodgers I think are a lock to win the NL West. I'm giving it to them, and I think the Braves are a lock to take the NL East. So we're not going to talk about those two teams in today's discussion. We'll talk about all NL Central teams, because I think that whole division is just full of wildcard teams. I don't know who's going to win that. There's no overwhelming favorites. So we'll take the Dodgers and Braves out this discussion and keep the rest of the National League intact. So looking at the rest of the NL, who do I think are the 3 scariest teams to steal the 3 wildcard spots from the D-backs? First one, super easy. We're going chalk with who had the top wild card spot last year, the Philadelphia Phillies. I mean, the Phillies are just too good on paper. You look at their lineup. I mean, you of course got Bryce Harper, you got Kyle Schwarber, Trey Turner, Castellanos, Alec Bohm, Bryson Stott. Like JT Realmuto's your number 7 hitter, Brandon Marsh is your number 8 hitter. Potentially, like, Phillies lineup is stacked. You still got Wheeler and Aaron Nola at the top of your rotation. Phillies, I think, are a good bet to get to 88 to 92 wins, get that top spot in the wild card race, and be a very, very dangerous postseason team, because not for the D-backs, but for the rest of Major League Baseball, it's hard to go into Philadelphia and win. So I would say they are the favorites to get the top wildcard spot once again. And number 2, I'm going chalk once again from last year. I'll go with the Miami Marlins. I think they have the second best chance to get a wildcard spot and steal one from the D-backs. Or I would say I think they're the second scariest team to steal a wildcard spot from the D-backs. Their lineup, I think it's improved from last season, because the players you traded for at the deadline now get a full season in Miami. Josh Bell, Jake Berger, Jazz Chisholm's healthy right now. Luis Ariz is still there. And we'll see about Tim Anderson, what he could do. Obviously, they lost Jorge Soler, which hurt, but that rotation is just going to be good. Luzardo, Yuri Perez, Braxton Garrett, Edward Cabrera, Trevor Rogers. I think they have a really good balance of their lineup and rotation. They're young, and I think they should still be getting better. Do have a little bit of experience from the postseason last year, so I like the Marlins. Number 2 on my list. And then number 3, the team that I think is the third scariest team to steal a wild card spot from the Dbacks. I had to do a lot of thinking on this one because I think it's close between this team and a few other teams, but I'm actually going to go with the Chicago Cubs. And again, if you look at last year's standings, it's not like I really gave you any insight at all, because last year's standings in the wild card, it was Phillies 1, Marlins 2, D-backs 3, and then guess who was number 4? The Chicago Cubs. But I can't help, and just when I looked at the teams on paper, I felt like it was going to stack up that way again if the D-backs don't make it to the wild card, because the Cubs, I just feel like, compared to the rest of the teams in the NL who could potentially take a wildcard spot, and we'll talk about them in just a second, I just feel like the Cubs have a better balance than most of the other teams. Their lineup, I don't think has a high ceiling, but I think it has a high floor. Bellinger is a stud if you get last year's Bellinger. Then there's just a lot of solid players. Ian Happ, Swanson, Suzuka, Morel. I don't think those guys are stars, but I think those are above average major leaguers. So I like their offensive pieces. And then the rotation, again, not a high ceiling, but a high floor. Justin Steele, Imanga, Kyle Hendricks, Jameson Taillon, those are quality starting pitchers. Maybe Justin Steele's the best one. I don't know if he's a true ace like what the numbers suggested last year, but at the very least, those are 4 guys that should be quality, decent starters for your team this upcoming season. So I feel like the 3 scariest teams to steal the wildcard spots from the D-backs this year are the Phillies, the Marlins, and the Cubs. And I'm sorry that's boring because it's just chalk. If you took out the D-backs from the wild card last season, that's who the 3 wild card teams would have been. But again, if you look at the teams on paper, I do think those are the 3 best non-D-backs teams in the National League if the Dodgers and Braves win their division. Because when I look at the teams past the Cubs, as to why I didn't pick any other teams, I mean, the Padres, I gave them a hard, long look. I just think the Padres were too top heavy. I love the top 4 of that lineup. I even like a Ha-Seong Kim, but after Kim, I think it drops off dramatically in that lineup. And the rotation, I think, drops off dramatically after Yu Darvish. I think they're just way too top heavy. I think the Cubs have a better depth of talent. The Cards, their rotation, I think, is too old. I do think the Cardinals could have a bounce back and win their division, but I like their lineup. Again, that rotation, it's just so old. The median age is 43, way too old for me. The Cincinnati Reds, it's the other side of the coin of the St. Louis Cardinals. I love the Reds' talent. They have solid talent in their lineup, very good young up-and-coming hitters, decent talent in their rotation. I mean, I like Graham Ashcraft. I like Hunter Green. I think the Reds are just too young. I think they need one more season. Cardinals too old. Reds too young. Milwaukee, I think, is just out. Traded Corbin Burns. I'm not in on Milwaukee this year. Then the Giants, again, just too many questions for me in that lineup and rotation. So I think it has to be Phillies, Marlins, and Cubs as the top 3 scariest teams to take wildcard spots if the D-backs don't make it as a wildcard team in 2024. Now, that's it for this edition of the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast. Come back tomorrow for more Diamondbacks news coverage and insight. We'll wrap up the final podcast of the week talking about spring training and what to look forward to this weekend. And as always, stay safe, stay healthy. Doses.